welcome to Ponder and Practice, the podcast for professional, high-achieving women who are ready to swap hustle for harmony, exhaustion for energy, and pain for power. I'm Dr. Catherine Hoffman, and I help value-driven, ambitious women achieve their goals by setting artful, integrity-aligned boundaries that create space for meaningful work and sincere connection. So, are you ready to discover the power of no? Well, let's get started. Hey there, friends, and welcome to another episode of Ponder and Practice. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It is, as ever, both a pleasure and an honor to share this time and space with you, so thanks so much. It's been a minute since I did an interview episode, and I am so excited to bring this conversation to you. I had initially intended to release it as a bonus episode alongside my two weekly shows, and obviously that has not happened. And based on the volume of work and the way that my work is shifting and evolving, I am going to be going back to a once a week format, so this interview is going to kick that off. I had the great pleasure to sit down with Dr. Meghan Marty. She is a clinical geropsychologist, and what that means is that she works in a clinical setting doing counseling and therapy with folks who are older adults. And I was so excited to have this conversation with her. I so enjoyed it because it's really rare in our culture to have conversations about healthy aging and what that looks like and what that can look like. And it's really rare to have conversations that include an awareness of the fact that human development doesn't end at any particular point in the lifespan. And in most of our popular conversations in media, even what's taught, in terms of psychology and whatnot, it's like, oh yeah, you develop from conception through maybe age 30, maybe age 35, and after that you're done, you're cooked, you're ready to go, and you are who you're going to be, and you're not really going to learn a whole lot more. And the fact is that nothing could be further from the truth. We continue to grow and evolve and develop throughout the entire course of our lifespan, and in as much as we do certainly gain more experience and hopefully wisdom that goes along with that, there are unique and special challenges that come with each and every phase of the lifespan. And so it was just so lovely to really dive into that space and really talk through, what is the research about, full adult human development, not just those years between, 18 and 30, but even between 30 and 50, but even after 50 years of age, there's still development happening. There are still things happening. There's still learning and that's happening, and growing that's happening, and new insights certainly that you can glean in those years as well. So I could not be happier with the conversation that we had. I have no doubt that you will enjoy it just as much. Regardless of your age, Meghan hosts some groups that are currently virtual. And she has some groups that are only for, they're more sort of a support group kind of situation for older adults. And so certainly if you fall in that space, I'm sure that she would welcome any inquiries around that. And she also has some book groups where she hosts reading around topics of geropsychology, of what it means to age well, what it means to get older, and continue to develop throughout later adulthood. And, I think it really does behoove all of us to think through that at some point in our lives with some regularity about what does it look like to age well? What does it mean for me to age well? What does it mean to age well psychologically and or physically? And so I really encourage you, if you have any interest at all, get in touch with Meghan and see what's available. And I'm going to link to her information in the show notes as well, so you can certainly check that out. But anyway, like I said, it was such a massive pleasure to have this conversation. I hope that you enjoy it just as much as I enjoyed having it. And so without further ado, here is my conversation with Dr. Meghan Marty. time and joining me here well, you have sun, I don't have sun, but this Friday morning. You and I connected through a mutual professional acquaintance who thought because you are in the world of psychology and I am in the world of psychology, we should connect. And I'm so glad that we did. So can you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am a clinical psychologist in private practice in Southeast Portland, and I have a practice called Rose City Geropsychology. And I primarily I provide individual therapy to adults age 60 and older who are dealing with emotional difficulties such as depression or anxiety or adjusting to life circumstances. I work with a lot of folks who are dealing with things like retirement or medical illness, certainly grief, loneliness, caregiving for a loved one. So I primarily do the individual psychotherapy, and then I also offer classes and groups that promote resilient aging as well. So I'd say those are the two primary things that I do in my practice.
Nice. I love that term, resilient aging. We'll come back to that, I'm sure. But for folks who are unfamiliar, and you sort of touched on this before, but when you're talking gerontology, technically speaking, what does that mean?
Yeah, so gerontology is its own field. It's the study of basically of aging processes and individuals across the life course. So looking at the physical and mental and social changes as people age. My practice name is, Rose City Geropsychology. So geropsychology tends to be an unfamiliar term to people, and it is not something that I made up. It is actually a real term. It's basically the combination of gerontology and psychology. So it's a specialty within professional psychology. And we apply the knowledge and methods of psychology to understanding and helping older people and their families. So
Yeah.
just kind of the combination of gerontology, kind of the study of aging with psychology.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And I think I'm seeing changes of this happening in the broader context of our culture. And like my husband makes fun of me because I use the word zeitgeist all the time, but I think it's appropriate. Like in the zeitgeist, this is shifting, but as a culture, we tend to only think about developmental psychology from like birth through maybe age 30, if we're being generous about it. And I think I was in a women's circle last night, and so I'm like heavy into this gender way of looking at things, and just thinking about the new president-elect and vice president-elect that we have. I think for women especially, it's like somehow we just stop at age 30, like you're done, you're set, you're like, you're supposed to, I'm using air quotes, you all can't see this, but like have been set up in your life, and you have your spouse and your work, and that's it, and you're done, like you're cooked, okay. And then there's this whole rest of the lifespan between like 30 all the way through potentially like the 90s, and then if you're extra lucky hitting 100 years old. So what are we missing that we're not talking about in that massive expanse of years?
Yeah. And, of course, I'm most familiar with the field of psychology, but that is very consistent with historically how psychology has seen the lifespan as well, that most of our theories of development are very focused on children and adolescents. And there's a few theories like Erik Erikson that does kind of extend, throughout adulthood, but even there, his theory sort of lumped everyone 60 and older in the same group. So, there's a lot of difference between a 60-year-old and a 95-year-old, right? So even the theories that do extend beyond kind of early adulthood are not very nuanced or complex compared to how real life actually is. And I think part of that is just that the lifespan has increased exponentially so quickly that it hasn't been that long that people have lived well into their 80s and 90s. And some of our theories and our thinking about development haven't necessarily caught up to that reality yet. I will say, though, that what we know about personality is that it does not tend to change much in adulthood. And I wonder if that is part of what kind of leads into this thinking that nothing much changes after age 30. So we do know from personality research that our personality is pretty stable across the lifespan. So someone who is extroverted when they're younger is likely to be extroverted when they're older. Or if they're conscientious when they're younger, they're likely to be conscientious when they're older. But I do my work day in and day out because I firmly believe that we all have the potential to grow and learn and develop up until the moment we take our last breath. So, there's that old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and that is absolutely not true in my experience, and also in the research and the literature in geropsychology as well. So, some of the things that we know, happen in development and later adulthood, I kind of think of it as kind of emotionally, cognitively, and socially is kind of how I would break it down. And there's a lot of research that shows that older adults are actually more effective at maintaining positive emotion and regulating emotion than younger adults are. And again, when I'm sharing this kind of literature and research, we're just talking about very kind of generalities. We will all be able to think of exceptions to these kind of general ways of development. But in general, older adults actually are better at regulating emotion. And we see that results in higher levels of positive emotion and life satisfaction. So it'll be kind of a surprise to some people, but we talk about this U curve of happiness. So there's been lots of studies looking at things like positive emotion and life satisfaction. And when we plot it out on a curve or on a chart, we see that the highest levels of positive emotion and life satisfaction are sort of like late teenage, early 20 years. And then there's a dip kind of throughout adulthood. And then it starts to increase again in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So the chart ends up looking like a U for life satisfaction, right? So a lot of people are really surprised to hear that actually in later adulthood, in general, people do have very positive emotion and high life satisfaction. The bottom of the curve actually is around age 50 that people tend to report the lowest level of life satisfaction. So you can take that however you want, right? If you're a person that sees the glass half full or half empty, right? I take it to mean that's really positive news, right? That if we are able to get through the struggles of midlife, we've got a lot of really good things to look forward to. Part of the reason why people think that older adults do report, more positive emotion and life satisfaction is that they have a lifetime of learning of how to regulate emotion and maintain positive emotion when they have it. Yeah. So that's kind of the good news of development kind of emotionally through older adulthood is that, we get better at regulating emotion. We also find that older adults tend to have more emotional complexity. So they're more able to kind of experience and be aware of a wide variety of emotions at one time. So in any given experience, maybe a younger adult would say, oh yeah, I was really angry in that situation. An older adult might be able to say, well, I was angry, but I was also disappointed and resentful, but also, kind of curious, right? And so we kind of get more complex and more nuance in our emotional experience as we age as well. Mm. And the similar thing happens cognitively. So again, this is in the absence of anything like mild cognitive impairment or dementia that we maintain our intelligence throughout the lifetime. That does not change. So as we age, we kind of accumulate this cognitive complexity as well, that we kind of have this accumulation of life experiences that then we can use to apply to kind of our relationships, our functioning, that things like that. A lot of people kind of think of that as wisdom. So kind of using life experience and the intelligence that we've gained throughout the life course and really being able to apply that effectively. And then the last thing I'll just mention with development and socially, there is a lot of evidence that as people perceive their future time to be less, so they're acknowledging that they have more time behind them than ahead of them in life. So when they kind of perceive themselves to have a limited life span, that really tends to help people to prioritize, especially relationships that kind of older adults have a tendency to say, you know what, these are the people that really are important to me and really matter to me. I'm going to make sure that I maintain my relationships with those folks, and I'm going to focus on being with them, right? So maybe it's a spouse or friends, that you've had for 60 years, those kinds of things, versus younger adults with kind of this sense of unlimited time ahead of them tend to have more of a broader social network, and it's more about meeting more people and kind of having as many social contacts as possible. So it's not that either one is good or bad, it's just kind of a difference in that people with limited lifespan are able to prioritize kind of the important relationships. So it's sort of in a sense, kind of a way of developing socially across the lifespan as well. Yeah. So I know I just threw a lot of information out there, but all that is to say is that there is possible, development emotionally, cognitively, and socially as we age.
Yeah. I there were two things that I wanted to ask you a little. Well, one is just to share my own personal way of being, my personality. I call myself a severe introvert because I'm just like, I need that time to myself so intensely. And if I don't get it, like it ends badly for everyone involved. But it's been interesting because I'm in my early 30s right now. And it's been interesting to see the people in my age demographic who are just, whether they identify as introverted or extroverted, they do tend to be just out and about and very socially connected, COVID notwithstanding. But, and I just have never gotten that. Like it never really, I'm just like, but why? I think because for me, there's an energy, like that payoff doesn't pencil out because the energy I would have to put out to develop those relationships doesn't, like that ROI doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so it has been interesting just as a young adult coming up in that way and noticing. And my husband is a couple of decades older than I am. And so he's very social and extroverted, but we talk, and my birthday was in October, and he was like, oh, well, how does it feel? And I was like, I don't know. I still feel like my chronological age doesn't really match up with my psychological age. And he's like, yeah, it'll probably happen when you're what? I said like 55. He's like, yeah, probably. Just like, at any rate. So that came up when you were talking about social, that adjustment phase that happened.
There's kind of two dimensions there. One is being an introvert, and a lot of people confuse being an introvert with being shy or being socially awkward, and they are not the same thing. It is really about where you get your energy. If you get your energy from spending time alone and kind of focused inward, or if you get your energy spending time with others and focused outward. Yeah. And the other piece of it is kind of what we were just talking about a moment ago about kind of prioritizing. If you think about, kind of, adults who are maybe in college in their late teens, early 20s, right? It is really about expanding the network, right? And that's very adaptive, right? Because you're probably looking for a partner. You're probably, trying to establish yourself in a career, and sort of the more people that excuse me, the better off you are. But then as things kind of get settled and maybe you do have a life partner and you have established a career, you don't necessarily need to focus on such a wide network.
Yeah.
but extroverts are still going to be extroverts and out and about and socializing whenever they can. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
The other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking is this U curve that you described.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. I'd be curious to know different cultures if that holds true, because the ages that you said kind of line up with your working years, and those are the
Yeah.
times when it gets kind of intense kind of fast, because you get set up in your job, you establish your family, you maybe like have parents who are aging, and so you're going to have to take care of them at some point in there. And so those life stressors can get super intense super fast, specifically over those years. And so I'm curious about that. And then also, I always think about like the 50s as like the second adolescence that happens.
Ah,
I don't know if you think about it that way or if that's technically correct, but it's like there's this whole, like you've had this half a century of experience to look back on, and
mhm.
then you're staring down and you're like, oh. And like you said, knowing that what's coming up is going to be less than what went before. And I remember talking with my mom when she was going through this, and I said that to her, and she's like, it kind of is. Like, it feels like I have to kind of regrow up again and like figure out what I'm actually about.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know about you, but like first adolescence was rough. It was not a happy time.
Uh-huh.
So it makes a lot of sense to me that that second like low point would happen at that time when folks are thinking, oh gosh, what what's going on
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. Well, so to answer your first question, the research on that, that shows these U curves on these charts of life satisfaction. I know that research has been conducted in North America and Europe, and I believe Asia as well. I don't know about Africa or South America, but the results hold cross-culturally.
Okay.
So, people living in different parts of the world, different cultures, different, races, backgrounds, those kinds of things, and gender as well. In general, the results hold. Um, and I think just kind of practically speaking, like you're talking about, someone who's in their 50s, very likely these days are in the middle of their career. They are raising children that are likely still in the home, and they are starting to have to perhaps offer more support to aging parents. So they're kind of the sandwich generation, right? And that is that's a lot of pressure and demand on time and responsibility, and just it's a big load for a lot of people. And I think you're right, there can also be this shift from kind of thinking, okay, I've got this unlimited time ahead of me, to okay, maybe I don't. What does that mean, right? And there can be a shift in priorities and identity, and figuring out, well, okay, if I don't have unlimited time and unlimited opportunities anymore, what do I want to focus on
Mhm.
that's most important to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that can feel like an uncomfortable process, right? Because
Mhm.
growth is not easy all the time, right? Or most of the time, maybe. So it can feel like a struggle, and yet so important if we're able to allow ourselves to kind of grapple with those questions.
Yeah. It does make a really big difference. Um, so to that end, as folks are moving forward chronologically in their lifespan, how do you define healthy aging?
So before I give my personal definition, I will say that there is no one agreed upon definition of healthy aging. So, the bad news is that there's no recipe that we all can follow to age well, right? There's no kind of, these are the 5 things you do and then you age in a healthy way. But the good news is that we get to define it for ourselves, kind of based on what's important to us and our unique circumstances, and the resources available to us. So, at least within geropsychology, there's a lot of kind of similar terms floating around, and they all kind of have different meanings. And again, there's no really widely agreed upon definitions. So, in geropsychology, we talk about successful aging. typically when people are referring to successful aging, they're talking about maintaining good cognitive and physical and psychological health. So usually they're talking about kind of a lack of disability or lack of kind of or good functional health. Certainly optimal aging is another term that people kind of throw around, and that's more kind of a recognition that we all have kind of different kind of resources and vulnerabilities, and optimal aging tends to refer more to aging processes that help us to maintain reasonable kind of functioning abilities in the face of illness. So it's like, if I have, say, an illness or a disability, how do I kind of manage that as best as possible? And then resilient aging is another term that people throw in. And I tend to use resilient aging myself. And that really is referring to kind of maintaining good adaptation under stress, including stress of chronic illness and disability. And it also includes the idea of positive development in later life. So I think healthy aging is probably the term that is kind of more widely used in society. And I think when people are using that term, they are mostly talking about physical health. So I know when I talk with medical providers about the kind of resilient aging classes and groups and things that I do, I actually do use the term healthy aging because that's kind of what people are used to hearing. But there is also kind of this bias in the term healthy aging that, somehow what older adulthood, if it's good if it looks mostly like middle adulthood, right? So if we still have 100%, independence and a lack of chronic illness or disability, but aging is so much more than that. It's not just kind of looking young, right? And doing all the things that we used to do. It can be so much more complex than that. So when I use the term resilient aging, I'm thinking more of, it's nice to have good cognitive and physical health. That's certainly nice when that happens, but it's not a necessary requirement for aging well. And in a lot of studies where older adults are asked about their ideas of successful aging and if they are aging successfully, a lot of them will have medical illness. And so it's not that, if you have an illness, you can't age well. There's kind of more to it than that. So for me, since I'm a psychologist and I'm thinking more about, kind of thinking processes, I think one really important component is to be able to be flexible in our thinking and our behaving. So finding ways of adapting to and accepting our changing circumstances. So rather than kind of rigidly getting fixed on this is the way things have always been and they need to stay that way, having a little bit more flexibility kind of to adapt along the way. I think being actively engaged in life is really, really important as well, whether that means with other people like our families or our communities, or activities, so just things that we enjoy doing that bring us some sense of joy and fulfillment. And I would say the other piece that seems really important to me, and this is based on the work that I have done, clinically over the years, is for people to have a sense of meaning and purpose as well. So, a sense that it matters that I'm here and I'm making a contribution. So very often when I'm working with folks who are struggling with depression, a lot of them tend to lack a sense of meaning, lack a sense of purpose or direction. And that can be a really hard one because a lot of us get meaning and purpose from our careers and from raising children. And when you are retired and you're done raising children, it can be a struggle sometimes to figure out, what does that mean now that I don't have those things that offered me a sense of meaning? How do I develop new ways of approaching that? So again, I think for me, healthy aging is a lot broader than just kind of being physically healthy. It is about being more flexible in our thinking, being engaged, and having a sense of purpose.
Yeah. I agree. I was just Thomas More had a book, I think it's called Aging Creatively.
Uh-huh.
Title of it. He talks a lot about that and this like shifting your identity, not shifting your identity, but just like you were saying, figuring out what's the kernel of you, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. What's
Mm-hmm.
that essence that once the career is done, once your kids are gone out of the house, started with their own families, like what's that most essential piece that makes each of us who we are,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to identify that and tap into that and then use that to be able to engage in the world in a way that is most fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um yeah. I have oh, it's not, it was sitting like right next to me by my desk. I have, oh gosh, what's his name, Sinclair, his last name is Sinclair, but he has this book called Longevity I've been reading, and it's interesting because he comes at it from like a genetic health perspective. It's not psychological,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. But it is interesting to see, like, what am I trying to say here? I do appreciate your perspective because it is very easy to get caught up in, I need to look a certain way, I need to keep my body a certain way, I have to be able to, you know, hike 20 miles or run a marathon when I'm 87. And I don't think there's anything wrong with those things. And also being able to include in your calculus of your own life, like your own development across the lifespan, being able to include in that, well, I'm going to do my best. Like maybe this is ideally where I want to get, but what are all of the other ways where I can maintain a sense of meaning, integrity, being in alignment with myself, and like sort of fulfilling that higher piece of my being that's not just physical.
Yeah.
Where is that wisdom? How do I deploy that? Deploy maybe isn't the best word, but I had a guest on the podcast. Oh gosh, this year is bananas. It must have been like the beginning of summer. Sarah Eisenberg. And in our conversation, I think, I don't know how old she is, but she is an elder to me for sure. And she said, you know what? My world shifted as soon as I included the phrase, I think she did use the phrase elder on
Uh-huh.
her marketing info, like on her website and all that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And it was like all these women who were in their young, like early 30s, just showed up to her, including me. Like I
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
contact with her during the time. And I thought, gosh, how interesting and how beautiful to be in that space and have that come up in your conscious awareness that yes, I am an elder at this point, and
Mhm.
that's part of my value, that's part of how I
Mhm.
provide meaning to myself and others
Mhm.
at this time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there is a lot to be said for um, focusing on quality of life versus quantity of life. A lot of people, you know, um, kind of focus on extending the life, but really what we don't just want longer life, we want longer, better life. And that can be a challenge when we're dealing with chronic illness or disability, things like that. But I think what you're talking about, all of these elements of kind of understanding, our wisdom and our experience, and really kind of making the most of our later years. So I think, in a lot of kind of popular literature and things like that, the focus is on just trying to live longer. And at least the folks that I work with, that's not the goal. It's just to live longer. It's to live longer better.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It does break my heart how much, I'm going to get on a soapbox a little bit here, but how and you and I talked about this the first time we chatted, but you know, we sort of neglect ourselves in a lot of ways through middle adulthood, and then we get to later adulthood and all these different conditions have sprung up, and there's no shame or blame to be had in that. And also, I just think there's a better way that we can do later adult life than how we're doing it. You know, like there's got to be a way that's better than polypharmacy or taking a bunch of medications at the same time and having side effects from your side effects from your side effects and just all of that. And anyway, I guess that's neither here nor there, but I love the term health span.
Mm-hmm.
To I want to have my health span be as equal to my lifespan as it possibly can be.
Yes.
And was it the name Cellier is coming to mind about like stress and health span and lifespan? That might not be right. But it's like you live until you die. So like that curve of life, it's like you're born and you're here. And then instead of having, you all can't see if you're listening, but I'm gesturing with my hand, like you have a line that's going straight across as you're alive. And then if your health span is equal to your lifespan, it just drops. And then like that's it. So I guess on the x-axis you would have years, and on the y-axis you would have like quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so at any rate, hopefully that makes sense.
You want your quality of life span to kind of match up with your actual chronological lifespan. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you for summing that up in a lovely way. So in terms of the folks who you work with, what are the biggest challenges that they experience? Where are the places where they're like, gosh, I just am struggling and I'm not sure how to either heal or grow or progress in a way that's meaningful?
Yeah. Well, I think kind of going off of what we were just talking about, I think ageism is a huge issue for the older adults that I work with, the elders that I work with, right? So it's an ism that we don't talk a lot about. I know this year there's been a lot more attention on racism and you know, social justice in that sense, but ageism, you know, are the attitudes and biases against aging and older adults, right? Kind of lumping all older adults together as this one homogeneous group, as if their age alone kind of makes them a certain way. You know, with this kind of pervasive view of older age just being about death and decline, right? And, you know, for those of us who grow up in the US, we get hundreds of thousands of messages through the entire course of our life about how it's bad to be old. And eventually that impacts our views of ourselves as we age. So I can't tell you how many people I've worked with in their 80s who say, you know, I don't want to go to that senior center. I don't want to go to that retirement community because I don't want to be with those old people. Right. So as if your, you know, your chronological age or having gray hair or using a cane to walk, you know, somehow makes you uninteresting or irrelevant. Right. So I actually think that is a huge problem for folks that I work with, and you know, that they have this fear of aging, this fear of being an older adult, being an elder, because there is ageism that we deal with in our culture anyway. I know it's different in other cultures. So sometimes when I'm working with folks in therapy, but also definitely in the groups and the book discussions that I offer at my practice, we start out by talking about ageism and what that means, you know, the external messages we receive, but then how we internalize that and how that can shape our view of ourselves. So I think that by, you know, having conversations like you and I are having today, and there are certainly a number of books out there, you know, kind of looking at some of the positive aspects of aging. I know Ashton Applewhite has written her book, This Chair Rocks. I would recommend that for anyone to read of any age. I think it's a fantastic book. I know the second edition of it just came out in the last year or so. She also has a fantastic website, also all about ageism and ways that we can all, regardless of our age, fight against ageism. So I think that's a big challenge. I think another big challenge are people who are faced with unchangeable or unsolvable challenges. So if things like chronic disease or terminal illness, something that we don't have a cure for yet, something that we just have to learn to live with, that perhaps will ultimately result in our death. I work with a lot of folks with Parkinson's disease, and sometimes they can live with Parkinson's disease for 20 years, and they, with the knowledge that it's not going to be cured, and they have to figure out how to live with it, even if it's kind of not solvable. Or certainly, the death of a spouse or the deaths of longtime friends, that is a permanent thing that we can't change, the fact that our loved one has died. Whereas in our earlier years, if I have a job that I don't like that's causing me a lot of stress, I can get a new job. If I'm in a partnership that isn't making me happy, I can get a new partner. There's things that we can kind of change. And certainly illness and death can happen to us, at any age, but they tend to happen more frequently in our later years. And sometimes, I'm working with people who haven't struggled with those things. They've been relatively healthy and very fortunate throughout their lifetimes. And now all of a sudden they're up against things that are not changeable. And it has to be a big shift in their perception and their attitudes and how they go about coping with those changes. And then I certainly work with folks, obviously with mental health struggles as well. So I work with a lot of folks that maybe have struggled with depression or anxiety on and off throughout their lifetimes. And, they might be coming up against some of these unchangeable circumstances. It's kind of exacerbating their depression or their anxiety. Which is causing them kind of, difficulties in their lives present day, even if they've had, depression and anxiety before. Yeah.
This is hard to answer, but I'm curious, what, just for my own benefit mostly, but what's that process of coaching someone through, not coaching, but sitting with them, working with them, supporting them through, this is what it is, and there's nothing to be done about that?
It certainly depends on the person. We kind of joke that in psychology, the answer is usually it depends, right? So, it depends on the person, it depends on the circumstances, it depends on the inner strength and resources that they've already developed, But I do end up talking with lots of folks about figuring out what is in their control and what is not in their control. And I think about the serenity prayer, right, that they use in AA, right? Changing the things I can, accepting the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. That is the big part of it. And so if we are dealing with something that, maybe is not a solvable problem, it still can be very, very useful to look at, okay, I can't get rid of this, say, this illness, but within that, what is in my control and what is not in my control? The things that are in our control, we'll control them, do them, right? If it's going to be helpful to, take a medication or to exercise or to change our diet, whatever it might be, then do those things and not get stuck on the things that are outside of our control. And then again, kind of depending on the person, if they're very focused on the things that are not in their control, then we use different interventions in psychotherapy to help people either change their perception or become more accepting of those things that they cannot change. So I work with a lot of folks. I use a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, in my psychotherapy work. as well as acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And both of those have a lot of similarities, but then some differences in kind of how you deal with kind of how you think about your situation, how you think about your circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it can be a process. Sometimes I'm just working with folks and I just see them a handful of times and they're kind of tuned up and ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other folks who I've worked with for years, and it is kind of an ongoing process of being able to let go of the things that they can't change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing
Yeah. Yeah.
that. And we have touched on this in different places, but just to explicitly get it on the table and be clear about it, what is the benefit of someone engaging in a therapeutic relationship, certainly in older adulthood, and also just over the course of the lifespan? I have ideas about this, obviously, but I'm curious to hear.
Yeah. So the way I think of it is that, just like glasses can help us to see better, psychotherapy can help us to think better and feel better so that we can live a meaningful life, whatever that means for us. So I think of it as a tool that we can use to improve our quality of life. And so, at any point in our lifetime, we can come against struggles that feel like they are insurmountable. And being able to have a place where you can come and speak with someone confidentially and honestly and openly and be understood and be accepted, in order to find ways of coping with our current struggles. I think that can be enormously beneficial, again, at any age. And particularly, for my practice, in later life, when people are focused, are coming up against new challenges that they might not have faced before. One of the things I love about working with elders is that, one of the first things I do with a lot of folks is just talk with them about how have they coped with struggles in the past, because they have a lifetime of dealing with struggles. So I always want to build on the strength and the resilience that someone already just kind of naturally has. But if those old ways of coping aren't working for them anymore, then how can we build new ways of coping? Yeah. So, I know there is still a lot of stigma against mental illness, mental health, and psychotherapy. When I was in graduate school, it was still kind of this unspoken belief that older adults don't engage in therapy, that somehow there is a greater stigma against therapy among older adults. I think that is changing a lot with the baby boomers as they are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, that they are more open to engaging in psychotherapy as a tool to help them to live better. So it's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign that something's wrong or defective with you. It is a sign that you care about yourself and you want to live the best life that you can. And psychotherapy is one tool to do that. There are lots of other tools as well. So psychotherapy isn't necessarily the best approach for everyone, but it certainly is helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. I've been there's a excuse me. There's an account I follow on Instagram, and I forget what the actual account is, but it's focused on decreasing stigma around therapy for people of color. And they have these t-shirts that says therapy is not a dirty word.
I like it.
Yes. Yeah. It's so important and so helpful. And I think my mom put me in therapy for the first time when I was like, God, 4 or 5. Like I could barely talk. But it helped. And since then, like off and on over the course of my life, I've been kind of in and out. I think part of the stigma that might come up for folks is that they think if they start, they have to do it forever. And just like you said, you have some folks you see a very limited number of times and then they're off and running and good
Yeah.
to go. And then sometimes it is a much longer process, and all of that is okay.
Mhm.
And just because you start seeing someone doesn't mean that you have to keep seeing someone.
Mhm.
Since I have you here, this wasn't on my list of things, but I always like to talk about this because it's really important for me to normalize it in my own interactions with folks. But when I was an intern, we were on an interprofessional team, the naturopathic students and also psychology students. So,
Mhm.
and we would come together once a week. We'd talk about shared cases. We'd do case reviews, like all these different things. And this issue came up of, and I've heard it talking to my like personal friends, and they're like, yeah, gosh, my voice, excuse me. They're like, yeah, I had this, and it can even be doctors. Like, I saw this doctor and it didn't really jive with me, and like, I didn't really want to go back. Or like, yeah, I started seeing this therapist, but it doesn't really, I don't know. And even myself, like, I have felt like, oh, I feel this pressure because it's like I have to, for some reason, like show up for this person who I'm
Ah,
paying to provide this service. But we worked really hard in that interprofessional group to be like, you know what, you can ask for somebody else. If we
mhm.
had shared clients and in our session, like with the naturopathic side, it came up that they weren't really jiving with their counselor,
Mhm.
I would say, you know what, ask for somebody new. It's
Mhm.
totally fine. It is okay to do that. And so how do you, I don't know. I just want to talk about it. I feel like therapy is a healing, the relationship is what is healing. Like you're
Yeah.
sitting there, you're feeling safe enough to talk to someone, your ability to open up and be really vulnerable. And if you don't have that connection with someone, it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And in the psychotherapy outcome research, the like the biggest kind of piece of the pie of what makes therapy work is the relationship between the therapist and the patient. So I 100% agree with you that that therapeutic alliance and that connection is really the thing that lays the groundwork for growth to happen and change to happen. And so yeah, certainly. If someone is not feeling like they're really gelling with their therapist or that they're really making the changes that they want to make, it's not necessarily that anyone's doing anything wrong. It might just be that you and the therapist are not a good fit for each other. Um, when I meet with folks for the first time for our intake session, I make that really clear that this first meeting is really a chance for us to get to know each other and see if we would be a good fit for working together. Because I don't want to waste their time and they don't want to waste my time if it's not working. There are other therapists. And, I don't take it personally if someone says, you know what, I just don't think this is working for me. I want them to live the best life that they can. If that means working with a different therapist, then great, do that. Certainly don't want to keep at something that isn't working.
No. Yeah, so important. And it surprises me how often it comes up. And I
Mhm.
guess because I'm sort of steeped in the space and have been forever since I've been alive, essentially, because my parents are psychologists and my own experience with my own mental health and this and that. It's like, yeah, just say thanks and ask for a referral if you need one. And, it's not a personal thing. So
Mhm. Mhm.
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. I have one last question before we wrap up for sure. And this is, I'm transitioning a little bit in my own work with folks because the women that I have been working with, I'm finding one, I don't know why women who are 28 years old like find me, but like those are the people who turn up. So that's interesting. But there's also among like my networks, my professional networks, there's a really common challenge in this inability to set boundaries. So
Mm,
even if somebody knows, like, yeah, these are the things I want to prioritize, and these are the relationships I want to put my time into, they struggle to actually put that container and build that container. And I'm curious if that's something that you see. I imagine it is, but if that's something you see shift in the older adults that you work with. And is that, if yes, is that just a natural outgrowth of growing older? Or is this, like, if you don't spend time building this particular skill, will it ever show up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So of course, my first answer is it depends. You know, I would say that it's not just a natural thing that happens without any intention or effort to be able to set healthy and clear boundaries. And if I am working with someone who is struggling with establishing or maintaining clear and healthy boundaries, the first thing we do is try to uncover why they are having that trouble, because there could be a million reasons for why. You know, I think for women especially, you know, we are really trained to put others' needs first, put other people ahead of ourselves. We're trained to be caretakers. It's changing maybe a little bit over time, but in general, women are still the caretakers. And we get sometimes subtle and not so subtle messages that we need to take care of everyone else first and make sure everyone else's needs are met, and then we can focus on our own. And so for a lot of us, it is difficult to go against that quote unquote training that we receive. But for, you know, again, there could be a million different reasons for why someone's having trouble maintaining those boundaries. So, you know, again, if I'm working on that with someone in therapy, we really try to uncover for them specifically what is making it hard for them to say no or to set up healthy boundaries. Yeah. And, you know, I would say there isn't a general rule that, you know, elders are better at setting boundaries, but, you know, it just depends on their life experience and what they've been able to work out for themselves over time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
This has been a real treat. I was looking forward to talking with you further, and it has been so lovely to learn from you. And I have been like out of the strictly like psychological space for a while, and just it feels so refreshing to dip my toe back in and like, oh yeah, the research and this and that. And I'm just thinking, oh God, I have some reading to do. I need to get back into this. So thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And I'm sure the listeners also have learned a ton. And so thank you for sharing your expertise.
You are so welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. If folks are interested in getting in touch with you for one reason or another, is there a way that they can do that?
Yeah, probably the best way would be to go to my website, which is a super long name. So hopefully you can include show notes, but it's my practice's name. So Rose City Geropsychology. So Rose, like the flower, City, Gero, Gero, psychology.com. And my phone number is on there. People can also sign up on my homepage. I have an e-newsletter that comes out once a month. An Aging Well newsletter is what I call it, that I include, that has different, you know, tips and suggestions and resources and events all related to aging well, including the book discussions that I offer at my practice and the aging groups that I offer at my practice. So if folks are interested in learning more about those, the newsletter is a good way to find out about those. Yeah.
Awesome. And are any of, I assume they're all virtual, but do you offer, is that open to folks who aren't necessarily in Oregon for the groups?
Yeah, for the book discussions and the groups, yeah, because they are not psychotherapy, they're more educational groups and discussion groups that, people outside of Oregon are welcome to join. The book discussions, actually, I love having people of all ages. I've had people as young as their mid-20s up into their mid-80s participate in those. We read books about healthy aging, or sometimes the books are a little bit more kind of like how-to manuals, and sometimes they're novels. So it's kind of a mix. And it's been really cool to have people of all different ages in those. The Resilient Aging Roundtable is for people age 60 and older. And that's a kind of a 6-session group where we focus on different aspects of aging well.
Mhm.
So yeah, the more the merrier. Yeah, everything is virtual for now, but as soon as we can safely return to in person, I really loved having groups. So I'm that is one thing I'm missing during COVID for sure, is doing those in person groups.
Yeah. Oh, oh, COVID.
Yeah.
What a time. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you again so much, Megan. And I look forward to hearing more from you.
Great. Thank you so much.